hello, and we'll just give it a couple of minutes as people are pouring in, and hopefully everyone is having a great day. Just a little bit of housekeeping, and that is that today's webinar is being recorded, which means if you have to hop off early, don't worry, you'll get the full recording tomorrow, the end of tomorrow, along with all the resources that we're talking about, all the little nuggets, hopefully, that we're telling people today. So don't worry if you have a kid that needs you or you have to go and make a late dinner. It's absolutely fine.
We will be here in a recording. We'll be here for a while.
And we'll try not to go over time. You know, we're not good at that. Sometimes I think we should just have said it was a longer webinar because we've always got so much to share that we get a bit carried away. So hopefully we'll be really well on time today. So let's get going. And when we were creating this webinar and thinking, what would we call it? One of the biggest problems people have today in the NDIS is confidence. We are scared about spending on the wrong things. We aren't sure what the rules are. There's one rule in the price guide. There's another rule in the guidelines. There's something else in the support lists. So we lack confidence in our NDIS environment, amongst other things. There's confusion and stress and emotional weakness. But this webinar is about building your confidence, giving you information that's going to make a difference to how you manage your NDIS plan or your NDIS environment. So let's start with the welcome to country. And I'm glad I put that on a slide because I always stress that I'm going to forget that. So I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the Gadigal land on which we meet today. And I would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, your two presenters this evening are myself, Bianca Shapiro, and I'm from my care space. And we have Kim Zinman, or Kim McMurchie. Only been married, like 5 years? Maybe?
Coming up 7, yep.
Okay, sorry. And Kim is from Plan Hero. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and my care space, and then I'll hand over to Kim to introduce herself. So I'm one of the partners and COO at my care space. We've been around for 8.5 years now, simply supporting participants and providers in the NDIS. We connect participants that have NDIS funding with providers of support and therapy. And we also connect people to information about every part of the NDIS, and easy to understand, bite-size, plain English information about the NDIS. So my care space will typically connect you with verified providers. With our therapy connection service, we are able to connect you with providers that don't have waitlists, therapy providers that don't have waitlists. I know that sounds like that's not possibly true, but it absolutely is. We have the largest aggregator of allied health therapy providers. So we know exactly who has a waitlist or who has capacity, and we connect my care space members with providers that have capacity. And with other supports like support work or social activities, we'll do that search for you. We'll send you options and then let you pick who you think is the best option for you. So that's myself, Bianca, and now over to Kim.
Yes, so I'm Kim, as Bianca introduced me earlier. I'm the very proud General Manager of Plan Hero. I've been on board since day dot. So we've been running for 4 years now, which is incredibly exciting. We are an independent plan manager. We've been around to see a lot of the changes that have taken place in the NDIS space and had to adapt and make sure that we're supporting participants and building capacity. But we're not really just a plan manager that just pays invoices. We are there to go above and beyond. We have an incredible team of plan managers, specialist plan managers, and everyone across the board, our accounts team, who are incredibly passionate about what we do. We have a really strong focus on building relationships with whether it's clients, participants, parents, carers, and making sure that they completely understand what their funding package is and what it can do for them. A big part, as you said, Bianca, of this is building people's confidence. And I think that's what we do day in, day out. I think people think plan managers just pay bills. They certainly do. And our job is just to make sure that we're making that a lot easier to navigate for you, for your child, or someone that you care for, or as a provider. There are so many changes that happen. I mean, the last year in itself has been a bit of a whirlwind to keep up with. I think we're constantly signing in day to day, wondering what's happened, what has the NDIS released, and we often find out at the same time that participants do. So we're having to scramble, and our biggest job is making sure that we have all the information and we have all the knowledge that we can impart it on people who are trying to just understand and navigate and get access to support. So you can see all the amazing points there. We're specialist plan managers.
Damn.
Oh, good.
Sorry.
Just as I was about to read.
Everything I touch, it's so sensitive. I'm trying to trick you, Kim.
No, I know that was really, as I was going off cuff. Now I'm reading it, but the team all have a real deep NDIS experience and have been in this NDIS space for a long time. They have lived experience. But the biggest part for us is that we connect with participants one-on-one. So every participant has their own plan manager. We are there to answer questions, to build that relationship and get back in touch with people if they have questions. And we have the knowledge. So we are sure, like you'll see today, that we'll either get back to you with the information or we'll make sure that we find out the right answer for you. And very, very lucky to have our specialist plan manager and guru and team leader, Jack, who is going to be manning the fort for us in the Q&A section and chat. So she's definitely there to help answer a lot of questions and make sure that we don't miss out on a lot of those gold nuggets of information. Just a bit of insight jokes here. We call Jack our Sherlock Holmes because she knows that price guide in and out. She is constantly up to date with what's happening at the NDIS and the changes. So she is our real wealth of knowledge, and we're very thankful and lucky to have her on board tonight. So please make sure that you guys have access, double check. If you guys can maybe even just pop a
Give
chat
us a
in
thumbs
there,
up.
give us a thumbs up, let us know that you can hear us. I hope this whole intro hasn't gone to waste because no one can actually hear anything we're saying. Amazing.
Yay, okay.
Leslie, Nina, amazing. So people can hear us, that's good. If you're not sure, there's a Q&A button down the bottom of the panel. So if you can't see where the Q&A is, there's a little tab that says more, I think next to the chat button. And if you click on that, there's a Q&A section and you can actually pop questions in there. It's a lot easier to respond to questions in a Q&A and everyone can see the questions and respond on that as well. So if at any point you have questions, by all means, pop it in there.
Yes, and Jack will be answering specific questions around NDIS supports. And if you do see a question there that is the same as one that you had, then obviously don't repeat it because you'll see her answer in a sec. So enough of our waffle. Let's get going. So this is what we're going to cover tonight. We'll spend a little bit of time just doing that core capacity building, capital. What are the difference between those three things? And that's the real basis of your plan. So you have to know it. Then we'll look in depth at social and community participation. This is a particular part of funding in your plan that mystifies a lot of people. And I don't know if we shot ourselves in the foot, but the price guide, the updated one, which has now got a fancy, you see, I've been here too long. 8 years ago, it was called the price guide. Now it's called the
PAPL, as we say.
No, let's not use it. That acronym's terrible. But it was live or released or in action from yesterday. Yes. So this is new information that is now official. So a lot of the rules around social and community participation and therapy have only actually been in effect from last night. So this is hot off the press for you. We'll look at therapy in depth because as plan managers, we're seeing lots of confusion, lots of problems in people's plans and the way they interact with providers and services in the therapy space. We'll look at what are stated supports, which affect many parts of your NDIS plan. We'll go back to that old funding periods and see what's changed in the last 3 months. And then paying for supports. How much is a support worker going to cost you? How do you know how much a support worker should cost you? How much is therapy going to cost you? How do you know how much it's going to cost you? Then we're just going to look at some spending tips. If you are spending too much, what can you do? And if you're spending too little, what can you do? And how do you actually keep track of those? And as we said, Q&A all the way through and at the end. So let's start with this bit. Now, this is, the crux of it, Kim, and I'm going to let you kick off with this for us tonight.
Amazing. As you've said that, my screen has just disconnected thanks to, I don't know what's going on.
There
So
you go.
I just want to make sure I'm on the right page for you guys and that I can see what you're seeing. So there's...
I can't see you, though. I can't see your
there you
picture.
go. Let me just...
Isn't
it fun to have a bit of tech support as the first section, as I'm...
Well, don't worry. I'll start because I'll give you a chance to sort out your camera.
Please do.
Okay, so there are, in fact, 4 top-level categories, but 3 of them are particularly important, and the 4th is just chucked in. So looking at our top 3, core, capacity building, and capital. So core is your absolute key support bucket of funding in your plan. It helps you with everyday activities. So things that you need or supports that you need in order to manage each day, where you would find funding for that in your core, and also to help you work towards your goals.
Yeah, and I'll jump in. Sorry, I'm back here. Sorry, B.
Yeah, there you are.
So one of the things that we definitely differentiate and see with the core supports is those are the longer term goals. So those are things that are helping your everyday disability related needs to access and live comfortably in your own home, to be independent at home, and also to do the same out in the community and be able to engage in the community. So it's definitely focusing more on those longer term goals, making people more independent, and making everyday life more accessible. And typically what we will see in terms of the types of supports there, the categories are listed. You have assistance with daily life, you have consumables, assistance with social and community participation, home and living, and transport. And not everyone will have funding allocated to all of these categories. We see plans where there's only consumables allocated, or there's a mix of assistance with daily life and home and living.
Kim, give us a little practical example of each of those 5 types of funding.
Yeah, so assistance with daily life could be anything from support work to cleaning, home and yard maintenance, assistance with meal preparation and delivery if you've been funded for that in your plan. So really making life at home easier and more accessible for someone with a disability, ensuring that they can get up and do everyday activities, get out of bed, get dressed, have a shower, look after themselves, grooming, and then also just live comfortably in the home and get around independently. The consumable items is usually low tech or low cost items that can assist someone to live comfortably. So it's very much around that assistance word. So it might be a product such as adaptive equipment. It might be certain types of cutlery at home. It might be sensory communication items, hearing items, specific, generally lower cost items that you can purchase off the shelf or that you can purchase from a disability specific store to help you meet those disability needs and build your independence.
And Kim, also things like your continence products or related things like that.
And hen supplies. So when people have specific nursing and we call them consumables, feeding, hen and feeding supplies, those will typically be funded there. And that will be listed in someone's plan. So if someone has like continence needs or specific nursing equipment needs, it will be listed in their plan that consumables budget has been put in place for that. So, you certainly will see there might be kids of an older age or that have passed an age where they no longer would require, nappies or consumable items if it wasn't disability related. So in that case, they would be allocated funding specifically for those items because it wouldn't be considered a standard child need.
So assistance with social and community participation, you don't need to worry about giving us an example because we're going to do that in depth. Just wrap it up with the last 2. quick
Yeah,
examples.
perfect. So home and living is generally around supported independent living and supports when you are in a disability specific uh, oh, my brain's just
Environment,
switched off.
accommodation.
Thank you. Yes, accommodation. Apologies in advance. It's been a long day, but I've been very excited to get you. So if I have moments of
We'll forgive you.
forgetfulness, I have an 18-month at home, so be kind to me. So home and living is definitely for those disability specific accommodation needs or supported independent living. And what we often find is that specific category is generally agency managed. So it's with NDIS provider that is NDIS registered. However, we do have fair few participants who will have that funding that is NDI a plan managed as well. So it's not a stock standard, even though the NDIS did say it in their guidelines. We do see it in some plans. And then the transport budget is as straightforward as it seems. So you're basically paid a certain amount at every fortnight to go towards your disability related transport needs, whether it's to work or whether it's to community supports, instead of us as a plan manager or the agency paying that provider directly. You'll get a budget to be able to help you to kind of travel if because of your disability you are unable to get to certain places.
Great. And capacity building, I'm going to shoot through that one for us, so that I'm dying to get into that social and community participation piece. And we're right there. Capacity building is funding that is going to help build your independence and your skills today so that you can reach your long-term goals. And that whole thing, we bandy about capacity building around so much. But as Jack was saying to me today, capacity building is about building your skills so you can do something on your own and be more independent in the future. And that differs from core, which is just helping you today. It's not trying to build your independence or your skills. It's literally just helping you every day. Whereas capacity building is helping you do that in the future. One little note there, you saw that it says it's not flexible. The core categories we had, you can switch funding through those categories. If you run out of a bucket of funding in one of them, you can steal from bucket in another. Whereas with our capacity building types of supports, what you've got is what you've got in each of these. So I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here. It's simply different types of supports that are going to help you build your skills and your independence. The ones that we are going to specifically look at is improved daily living skills. That's the last one there, which is our therapy.
Can I just cut in there, Bianca, if you go back one slide quickly, I do want to make it really clear that both Plan Hero and My Care Space have a heap of really helpful resources on our website as well that will deep dive into each of these categories. So whilst we are kind of skimming over these because we've got a lot to cover today, we do have some amazing resources. And Plan Hero have also just released some really handy funding guides, which you can access through our resources or on our homepage. And it goes through a lot of these specific things. So employment and education, housing, therapy, and all of these specifics. So just in case, don't think that we're not going to cover it, or we're going to share some helpful tips at the end. But yeah, there's plenty of things to go off on our websites as well.
Okay, our capital supports are our high cost pieces of assistive technology, things like wheelchairs, which can be really hefty and expensive, vehicle modifications. And typically you'll have that funding for a one-off purchase. And typically it will be stated, and we're going to talk about stated supports as we move on, stated in your plan, which means you can only spend it on that specific item.
And we did actually already have a question in Q&A that says, they were asking about whether consumables included low-cost modifications such as wheelchair adjustments. So that would fall under capital. So any kind of wheelchair, home modifications, specific technology items, maintenance, repairs, and you can see there in home mods would fall under this capital budget. So these are the bigger ticket items and generally the ones that will cost quite a large amount or require a bit more guidance in setting up. It's not just something you buy off the shelf. You'll need someone to actually assist you in purchasing or give advice.
And our SDA, our Specialist Disability Accommodation, which is the bricks and mortar, if you have funding for it. And real briefly, this recurring element that we've got here as our fourth top level funding category, it just refers to funds that the NDIS is automatically paying into your bank. This could be something like a transport allowance, which will automatically appear in your bank every 2 weeks. So you wouldn't need to claim those supports. All right, yay. I am so excited to do this because the number of people that ask us about this, the number of searches we have on my care space around this. So this is your latest and greatest. So we'll look at social and community participation funding, what it is, how you know you got it in your plan, and then from a practical perspective, what you can actually spend it on, which is always important these days. So looking at the two places that you're going to find it in your plan, you saw it in core, and I actually didn't point it out in capacity building, but it appears in both those two parts. So I'll let Kim go through the core and social and community participation when we find it in the core part of our plan.
Perfect. And listen, typically most people will have it in the core. It's more common that someone would have funding for social and community participation in core, whereas under capacity building, it generally is a far more stated item and quite specific in terms of the wording and how it's tailored. So social and community participation in core would basically appear in 3 different categories, so subcategories. One is assistance to access social, community, and recreational activities. Then we have group and centre-based activities, and then you have community, social, and recreational activities. I mean, the NDIS have not done a very good job at naming these 3 categories because they all kind of sound the same and they don't give really much information about what they are. But the tip in this one is in the word assistance. So assistance to access community, social, and recreational activities is really help from someone such as a support worker or a mentor or someone who can help you to access supports outside of the house. So typically they're put in place for people who might have barriers when it comes to social interactions, getting out of the house. They might be at risk of social isolation, or specifically have that goal around building independence, which we discovered earlier around that core funding. So this would really be for a support worker that's going to come, take you out of the house, take you to a group activity, take you to meet your friends, take you to a social, group or to a hobby, and they would assist you in doing so because of your disability. You might be unable to do so, or you might not have built the skill set yet to do so. A group and centre-based activity is as it says. So you're attending a group or a centre where they are running activities that will basically build your skills around participating in social and community activities. So whether it is building someone's communication skills or whether at the activity in the group centre they're doing, hobbies where you're meeting people of like-minded people who are interested in similar things. You're working on your communication, on your confidence, and it's just another way to meet people. That is really when you're attending a particular group and centre-based activity to engage in community.
A big difference between the first one, Kim, and this one is actually the pricing.
Yes.
Because with that assistance that you might get from a support worker, you're paying support worker rates. And goodness, when you're going on a Sunday or doing something on a Sunday or Saturday or a public holiday, those rates can be really quite hefty. Whereas with your group and center-based activities, typically they're much lower. And also the way that the NDIS has actually set this up is if there is a center-based activity, they take the total cost of the activity and they divide it by the number of people that go to it. So it can be quite cost-effective for you as the participant if you're able to access this kind of activity because you get, one might say, good value for your money because you're actually sharing that cost.
Yes. And the only limitation here is, many people live in locations where they just don't have access or there aren't, group and centre-based activities being offered. So a support worker one-on-one really is the only option, or that specific person's disability needs require one-on-one support. So there's definitely variations in this and what's to offer. And this is always a bit of a tricky one. The NDIS kind of flip-flop a little bit around this one. And I think this is the meaty part that you were really excited to get into, Bianca, because there is still so much grey area. But this is
the plan managers said to me, and I quote, "This is a no-no for plan managers."
Yeah,
they very seldom pay this out because it is so specific.
Yeah, and it is community, social, and recreational activities. So this is additional disability costs that are unique to you, and how the PAPL, as we said, pricing arrangements and price limits say it, they've worded it very specific. So it's not something that you can just generally throw out examples. It is very tailored specifically to each individual. So the exact explanation, and I pulled this here because it ties in very well to this capacity building social and community participation example, which we'll get to. But this section in core and your capacity building social and community participation are essentially tailored for individual participants with extraordinary support needs to assist them to participate in the community. Extraordinary support needs arise due to a participant's specific situational and personal circumstances. So I previously touched on where social isolation was, a potential risk, or whether people need to build skills around social interaction for their own safety and learning about public transport. This is certainly one of those areas that you would see this type of funding come under. There are very specific items that are excluded in the NDIS out list that would pertain to this list here. So what you cannot spend your funding on is probably the most important part in this social and community participation. Typically, the NDIS won't actually fund the activity itself. They'll fund the skill building component or the assistance, but this is the one where it's a little bit of a gray area. So if you have a very specific circumstance, they might, in some instances, put funding in your plan to cover that specific activity, or, it says here membership fee, so it wouldn't really be membership, but specific course if it is disability specific and you have been approved for the funding.
So these items in that last line are the things that are not allowed, that you're not allowed to spend it on. We've seen that section 10 that's used for our NDIS support list, what you can and can't spend your funding on. And the way that this has been updated in the latest document is now they actually say, and you cannot spend it on, and it's got a number of items. This is just a couple of examples that you cannot spend your funding on.
Yep. Definitely. And now this is the social and community participation portion of capacity building. And I can see we have a question from Michael in Q&A. So I'll go through this. And Michael, if that doesn't answer your question, please do give me another thumbs up. But these are the 4 separate subcategories that might fall under social and community participation in capacity building. So the 3 that we just covered was under core. This is capacity building: assistance in coordinating or managing life stages, transitions, and supports; development of daily living and life skills; innovative community participation; and community social and recreation activities. So I'm going to start with those top 2. There's a lot of similarities. B, sorry, you can jump in.
I keep like kind of taking a breath because I just want to keep reminding everybody, core was assisting, capacity building is building skills.
Yeah.
So some of these sound the same and they have been named the same, but the actual outcome that they are trying to achieve and the goals that they relate to are very, very different.
Yeah. And a lot of this is around what you see here: mentoring, peer support, one-on-one skill development, in some cases, group skill development. So you might still have a support worker or a mentor or a peer that is providing these supports, but the goal is around building your skills to ensure that you are able to do that independently, engage in community independently, build your social skills and build your communication skills independently. That is the long-term goal. So typically you will see someone like a mentor, or it might even be a therapist that's doing one-on-one skill development in these scenarios, but it really is to assist people through those different stages in life. So here an example is support with school transition. We might have people who are being supported to go and live on their own and build that social and community participation as well. Yes, there's an independent element, but it's also, if you're living on your own, you need to avoid that social isolation. So there's an element of building those skills of, okay, how do I now get out of the house? How do I meet new people? How do I navigate community? How do I learn skills around public transport? What's best in terms of my safety? And that very much kind of fits into this category and the next category, if you want to head on to the next one, which is development of daily living and life skills. So this is really exactly as it says, the skills that are important and imperative at that stage of the participant's life.
And these, there's a wide range of these. I was chatting to one of the plan managers before, because I always say, and I'm sure you see this, Kim, what are you seeing? What are people claiming for? Because our our plan managers, including Kim, are at the coal face. Like, you're actually at that point where you see what people have funding for, you see what they're claiming. So that's the best place to look. And that's why these webinars are so useful when we bring in our plan managers at Plan Hero, because they're actually giving you, they're telling you what people are paying for. So that's where the ideas come from. It's not like, we're making it up anyway. This is actually what people are paying for. And some of the examples that I got today was, if you had a son or a daughter who found it really challenging to go into a supermarket and buy something, or to go into a shop and ask for something, that would be a skill that they need to learn as they get older. They're going to need to be able to go into a shopping center and buy something, or a supermarket and buy something. That was a great example. Another example might be for an adult that finds shopping centers really overwhelming. The noise and the sound and the people, and it might make them anxious. So they need to develop skill that they're going to be using in their daily lives, but that are going to make them more independent later and be able to go to a supermarket or to a shopping center and do what they need to do without having a problem. Travel training, transport is so imperative. If we want to get out to the community, well, how are we going to get there? We might have to catch a bus. So learning how to catch a bus to go somewhere is super important in building independence. So these are all examples of the type of funding that people are using.
Yeah, and in some cases, you also might find, a lot of children tend to have funding under social and community participation, and that's built around them learning communication skills so that they can have conversations to maintain relationships and make friends. It's as simple as that, really. It's being able to hold a conversation, learn how to ask questions and give answers, some subtle cues, finding, common points between other children, or that's why attending certain groups or attending certain activities where there is a common interest can be really helpful, because it's that first trigger, but it's building the skills to get there, and then to participate in that activity as well. So there's a whole range. We could go on and give you 700 different examples here.
But we won't.
Case by case, and we won't. But it really is very broad and very much specific to the individual. So this innovative community participation kind of draws on what I was talking about before, when it's a real extraordinary support, that, when an individual has to have a very tailored plan that is specific to them to assist them to participate in the community. Now, I'm going to be completely honest. I'm a plan manager, and I still find these three completely confusing to differentiate between, because it still says that you can't pay for the cost of the actual, activity. So the NDIS made it really clear that providers can't use supports for items that were excluded in Section 10 of the legislation. So things like after-school care, recreation and sporting activities, the actual activities, tuition, general health, exercise and fitness. So what does that kind of leave us with? Like, it's still essentially that support piece and that assistance piece. There's no.
So we putting it in here. I mean, we literally sat this afternoon with the plan managers going, has anybody processed innovative community participation in capacity building? And we actually couldn't find anything.
It's been a really, really long time.
So it's there.
Yeah.
And the problem with this one, Kim, do you remember this used to be like the loophole? Basically, providers used to just use it for anything that didn't fit anything else in a social sense. They would use this one, but this has been locked down now. Like, there's no loophole. It's basically, I mean, we can't find what someone's actually going to be able to use it for, and we can pay it. So
no, and the reality is that the NDIS have put a lot of safeguards in place for this one. There's no price limit on it, but that doesn't mean you just use it willy-nilly because it's there. For the most part, I think we do have to see this quite clearly stated or included in the description of that person's social and community participation funding for it to be allowed. And what's interesting is this next one is actually will cover some of those group activities. So where it is, camp, or a class or a vacation activity that is disability specific, that has capacity building components built into that, that might be funded very likely within this community participation activity. So it might include things like assistance to establish volunteer programs in the community. It might also include peer support. It might include individual skill development. So really, they've taken those like peer support, individual skill development, and general communication participation, and they've separated it into 4 categories. But really, I think it kind of only needs 1 or 2, because it's still really not funding everything that would be encompassed under social and community participation.
This is the easiest one to understand, actually. That group activity, probably what most people are actually have on their invoice when they're using this funding. A couple of examples might be if the PCYC had an inclusive activity or event, then you could spend your funding on that if it meant that you could go there and build your communication skills and meet other people, get access to the community. Or you might have something like bowl abilities, where it's very specific disability related support. And the thing that I guess I do want to make clear, and Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't, like, we don't, me or you as a participant who has funding, we don't really need to know the difference between these groups. The provider does, because it's going to decide, he's going to decide, or she's going to decide which line item they put on your invoice. But for you, just looking at these different sections, you don't have to remember what they're called. You don't have to worry about that. Hopefully what it's just showing you is the type of support that you can spend this social and community participation funding on in your capacity building part of your plan.
Definitely. And that's definitely on your plan manager or your provider to be able to educate you on what would be a suitable place for that to be funded. Because, as I said, there's such a broad range there. I will point out as well that, the biggest thing is that they just won't cover the cost of the activity unless it is clearly a disability specific support. So in these particular cases, we're seeing that these are kind of only really being funded again by disability specific organizations. If there is proof that that entry fee or the cost of that particular program is specific to a disability, then you might be able to have it funded. But the whole crux of the NDIS is, if you're trying to go to a movie, they're not going to pay for the movie fee, just like because there's no disability relation to the actual cost of the movie. But they will pay for someone to attend the movie with you if you have specific access requirements, or, if social and community participation is one of your goals. So what you kind of need to do is take a step back and think, like, what is the primary goal? As you said, what is the long-term goal that you're trying to achieve? If the access is the big part, if finding an appropriate activity is the right part, then those are kind of the topics that we're looking about. If getting support to build your skills to participate is that part, I think those are the biggest things to take away from this social and community participation. Is probably the first slide, where it had peer and mentoring, individual skill development. You can go back maybe 2 more. I'll make sure I didn't miss anything. There you go. Mentoring, peer support, individual skill development. This is really the crux. Yes, we've listed it under assistance in coordinating or managing life stages, but primarily this is what we see funded in social and community participation. So, take the middle section out there, and you can kind of say this is what would typically be funded if someone has this budget.
Kim, you know how when those support lists came out, there was just complete mayhem around group activities and social activities. And then that seems to have settled now, where, the NDIS has put some requirements in place. They've clarified gaming, and they've kind of addressed, what group activity is actually suitable. But from what I gather, it's particularly activities where there's a predefined outcome, where the organization has said, this is an activity, the goals of the activity are, the outcome for the participants are, and what would be really helpful is if there's some kind of measurement of outcome by the end of it, to show that they spent their funding on this activity, which was social, in order to build X skills, which will help them reach X goal, and then some kind of sort of proof, to use that word, measurement, of how you reach that goal. And some of that is actually on the provider of the services. And I know my CareSpace and Plan Hero work closely with providers, helping them structure those programs, helping them put in place the things that they need to demonstrate that people can actually spend their funding on it. Off the top of your head, and I don't know if Jack can chuck something in the chat if there's something that she's thought of. Is there anything that is like the trap for participants in this social and community participation, social activity, group kind of activity? So we're in the capacity building area, which is much more murky, let's say, than our core area. Do you see anything in this area which is a trap where people end up spending money on activities, which then they submit to the NDIS or they submit to a plan manager and they can't actually claim it? Can you think of anything that's tricky?
There's definitely things like membership subscriptions. Those are things that are a big no-no and that have been, the NDS have taken quite a clear stance on. I would just always be wary of providers, especially if it's like a term payment. Here, I'm going to pay 10 weeks upfront, and that's okay. We'll put it through. We'll find a line item. It's just not that easy anymore. And the thing is that the NDIS might process that payment in that period of time, but we're seeing audits of these kind of claims a month, 6 months, 12 months, 24 months down the line. So just because the NDS have technically paid the claim doesn't necessarily mean that they've approved it. You can't just assume that
can you believe
you've got a payment. So the NDIS aren't fine-tooth combing every single invoice, but they are coming back and reviewing those. And I will say that what they do seem to do, not to add the fear of God into anyone or go completely off track, but they kind of pick a topic that they like to look into. So, for example, they might have chosen consumables or short-term accommodation a while ago, and they picked a bunch of claims from people who were funding items out of that line item, and they audited them. So if you're using this line item to claim for a support, they might decide 6 months' time, we're going to review 100,000 people or claims that we've put through under innovative community participation, and we're going to make sure that it meets our guidelines. And we're going to go through this, and the fraud team are going to investigate it further, and they're going to ask for the documentation. So it's not happening in real time. The NDS aren't going through every single claim that's being submitted and saying, yep, I can see that invoice is legitimate. We'll pay it. We're never going to come back and ask. So, it's really hard as a plan manager to as well, and constantly with this update and change in the legislation to be able to say, well, they've released these new guidelines. Yes, you might be able to put it through in this particular instance, but that's not a safeguard, and you will be responsible to pay that funds back. So if you have a provider that's pressuring you to pay $1,000, $2,000, and put that through to your plan manager and just see if it gets funded, just because it goes through in that instant doesn't necessarily mean that it is following all of the rules and it should be done.
And as a plan manager, it's very difficult because we have rules that we have to follow, and even if we don't like them. And the risk for a plan manager is that if we actually pay something we weren't supposed to, the NDIS will come back and say, you weren't supposed to pay that because we've looked at that invoice and we can see that they shouldn't have used their funding on it. So we will just take that funding off you, the plan manager, and you can go back to the provider and get it back from them, which will never happen. So plan managers, which everybody would have noticed, are much stricter than they were because they have to be. But the risk to you as a participant, let me just mention, is that if you are spending on things you shouldn't be, even if you shop around plan managers and you find the one that's going to pay that thing that everybody else said no, there is a risk that if you are audited, and people are regularly audited, and you are caught spending on something you shouldn't have, all they will do is they will change you from plan managed to agency managed, just like that. You will get an email saying, we are changing you to agency managed. And we have participants that we know well, that we have relationships with, not necessarily in Plan Hero, but with my care space, where they have been changed overnight to agency managed because the NDIS said they didn't think that they were spending their funds appropriately. So, trying to get it right is something that we do have to do. But if you have a good plan manager like Plan Hero, ask your plan manager before you spend the money. They will look at your plan. You have your own plan manager, so they know who you are. They'll look at your plan. You could say, I want to do this program using my capacity building social funding. Is that okay? And rather have your plan manager look at it and go, yep, that looks okay, no problem. Or look at it and go, look, I got to tell you, we're not going to be able to pay that. You would be out of pocket because your plan manager wouldn't be able to pay it. So if you are already with Plan Hero, ask them. They will answer those questions. And if you're with another plan manager, make sure that they'll answer those questions for you as well. This last piece, which, damn, I noticed I have a typo in it, which I hate, is something that we don't talk about. And it's such a great conversation with the plan managers about travel and in the social and community participation, because it can be so confusing. And the extra costs. So you have the cost of the support worker, let's say, in your core to assist you to that social activity, or in your capacity building, you might have the cost of peer support or an activity itself, but there might also be other charges that are related. And these are 4 specific ones that we see in the price guide, and that is non-face-to-face charges, things like case notes, developing specific programs for you. Maybe you need an adjusted program to meet your needs. They can charge you for that, and you can pay for it. Provider travel and activity-based transport. Now, the really nifty thing with those two is provider travel is just the provider in the car, no participant. That's how you remember it. If a provider is wanting to charge for provider travel, they're actually charging for their own providers or their own staff to travel somewhere before or after that activity. And
usually it's to get to you or, return to another appointment afterwards. It's their time traveling to that appointment or to provide supports to you, and then, away from their last place of work.
And also what's interesting with that is that they can't charge you, like a support fee as well as that. It is literally the cost that they attribute to their travel. And it's typically measured in kilometers. So it would be based on whatever the current rate is it 90 cents or $1 a kilometer?
98, around $1. That's for activity-based transport, yes.
Yes, and then that activity-based transport also, that is when the participant is in the car.
Yes.
Sorry, it's not supposed to say not. When the participant is in the car, activity-based transport, but when they're not in the car, that would be provider travel. And all of these things should be agreed by the participant beforehand. It's not like they can just create an invoice for your activity and then slap on provider travel. If you didn't agree to that beforehand, they can't just decide to charge that. And that brings us to service agreements. How important is that with these kinds of activities, Kim?
Oh, huge. I mean, service agreements, I think people really underestimate how important it is to protect the participant and the provider. So, you might have providers wanting to put something in place and you think that's just trying to stronghold or to keep your funding in a certain place, but it's actually to protect the participant as well, so that they're really clear on what they're agreeing to, on what the terms are, and on these very specific travel and cancellation fees. And the reason why it's so important, and it's also really frustrating, is that when the NDIS typically creates someone's plan, they'll put funding in there for the actual support. They won't always include funding that will accommodate travel costs on top of it and cancellation fees. So what we often see with things like capacity building, and this is probably more typical for things like therapy, is you might be allocated 12 hours of OT for the entire year. Now that's just 12 hours of support. They're not on top of that also including 30 minutes of provider travel plus cancellations should you have to cancel one of those at the last minute, plus any additional costs for non-face-to-face supports. That's travel in particular, but the same applies to core, to social and community participation. So you have to be really clued in, or at least know that these are conversations that you should be having with the provider, because 99% of providers will and can and should be, to be honest, because it is their time and their job that they're putting in there, they should be charging for these additional fees. So any non-face-to-face, when they're doing case notes or program development, sometimes even back-to-back emails and phone calls, if they're constantly talking about certain cases with them, the same as their own travel to take you to places. And if you cancel, there's a lot of things, that small bits that add up, that can actually take up a bulk of that funding if you're not really aware that that's included in the agreement costs.
And I've got a sample of a plan here where we have social and community participation in it. What's interesting here is that you can see I've circled a couple of things there. The fact that it's a stated support means it can only be used for this.
Yeah.
And it will indicate how this particular support is managed. And you could be plan managed and have, or self-managed and have something plan managed, or be plan managed and have something agency managed. You'll see this kind of thing on all of the supports within your plan. Now, this one says increased social and community participation. So where we got that, Kim? Is it core or is it in capacity building?
So this is a standard capacity building. But what you can see, which is so confusing, as I said, is it doesn't say this is capacity building, increase social and community participation, and it includes one of those 4 categories of assistance with life transitions or individual skill development or innovative community participation. It doesn't do that. It's just telling this person that they have funding under increased social and community participation for capacity building. And then it gives you a description. So it says supports to allow you to take part in skill-based learning to develop independence in accessing the community. You can basically fund 2 hours per week, during school weeks for individual life skills development and training. This can include public transport training and developing social skills. So this might be a peer mentoring. It might be assistance with transition through certain phases. This person's still at school, so they're developing skills out in the community. It might be around public transport. It might be one-on-one skills to develop independence. So if that person needs assistance with communication, if that person needs assistance with getting out of that, going out without their parents so that they're building that independence, for example, that could be included as one of the examples. You can see that it is very broad in terms of the description. It's not pulling in one of those 4 categories that we mentioned quite typically, but it is a stated support, which means that you would be using it for those areas. This is another example. I mean, this one does very specifically state support to help with coordinating or managing life stages, transitions, and supports includes, it also says mentoring, peer support, and individual skill development. So there's a whole range of skills that you or supports that you could really access with this. It is also stated and it is also plan managed, but it is a far more general. What you probably wouldn't be able to do in this case is pay for, as we said, specific activities, disability-specific activities, because that's not stated or mentioned anywhere in this specific plan.
So you couldn't go and do like a group activity in a day center if you had something like that in your plan?
Well, you couldn't do like a camp or a vacation or something where you're actually having to pay for that specific activity. Group and centres still might fall under this because there is a capacity building component, but you might not be able to pay for an actual activity, even if it is disability specific, if it wasn't mentioned there. And Jack, I might get you just to clarify that I don't know if you can do Q&As here, but if you want to just pop it in the chat to us, then I can just pass on Jackie's insight. She's always my go-to. But yeah, as far as I can recall with all the changes, I'm pretty sure. And this is a perfect example of how it would appear in your plan. I love looking at it like this because I think it makes it really clear. It basically gives you the description of what the support is. It's given you the example of the topic, so increased social and community participation. It's given you the total funding amount of $12,380. It's telling you how the funds are managed. So this is a plan managed budget. It also gives you the funding period schedule, which we'll get into shortly. But in this case, it's basically telling you that you have 12 months, the full plan period, and that full amount is available for the full plan period. So there's no real implications on funding periods in this example. I think the next one is the better one. And it's also telling you that it is stated.
So in the previous one, you could just spend it however you liked in those 12 months. But in this one, and we're going to touch on funding periods later. You have to actually spend it in these specific periods.
Yes.
Good
So
old
this is
funding periods.
exactly.
Oops,
And you
sorry.
can see the examples here. Like if you just look on the left side of the screen where it gives the description of this category, they tell you that funding has been included for 4 hours a week of one-to-one support. So you'd be expected to be spending this on 4 hours of one-to-one skill development, peer mentoring, whatever it might be to help build your independence and skills. Whereas the next one, if you go to that was this one. If you go back to the previous one, it's kind of just giving you that more general mentoring.
No time on hours
No,
or just
no.
however you want.
And the reason why the next one says 4 hours a week of one-to-one support is because they're broken up into 3 months. So they're telling you how they got that amount. They said they've allocated every 3 months, they've given you 4 hours of one-to-one support, and that's a total of $784. So you can't spend more than that because that's how much they've built into the plan. It's a very specific outline of what they're intending you to spend it on.
Okay, so that was our social and community participation, looking at in core, which is assisting you in your everyday life. So things like helping you get to those social activities or be part of the community. And then in capacity building, which is building your skills and independence so that you can do things on your own later that you might be learning to do now. Now, therapy also falls under the capacity building supports in your NDIS plan. And that's probably, would you say it's probably the most common bucket of funding that we see people have in plans? I think
I've never seen someone without that funding.
I was just going to
someone
say
with only that, like a core, maybe core. I wouldn't say every participant has, but I've never seen a plan that doesn't have. It's called Improved Daily Living Therapy. I've never seen someone that doesn't have that in their plan. So I'm pretty sure everyone has. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Anyone on here, but I'm pretty sure that everyone has that in there.
So we're going to have a little look at therapy in the NDIS and just touching on, what it actually is. The new therapy guidelines was released on the 25th of October. So this is all brand new confirmation information that the NDIS has made public, and now we all must make sure that we stick to. They talk about evidence-based. What do they mean by that? Then they have actually listed the therapy that they will in fact fund.
Yep.
And then finally, just like we looked at social and community participation in the plan, where are we going to find the therapy in your plan? So this is the NDIS's definition of therapy. It's services, items, and equipment. And they must be related to your disability, and they must meet all the NDIS funding criteria, which is that reasonable and necessary requirements. Things like they're going to build your skills, they're not going to build harm, they're reasonably priced. We do have a resource on what does reasonable and necessary mean. And
well, that applies to every category. Everything that you're buying in your plan or accessing has to meet the reasonable and necessary guidelines. But this is the big one. This is the big one when it comes to therapy, and a lot of the changes that they've made in the last year, I would say.
So we've heard the term evidence-based a lot over the last 8 years, but we haven't actually had like a proper stated definition of what they call evidence-based in a guideline on therapy. This is the first time I've seen this. Hopefully I'm not going to be embarrassed and proven wrong, but it's looking at if there is a current best practice, something firm around the research and best practice of a particular therapy. It would look at people, research, advice, community input. So they would look at all of those elements if they're deciding if something they feel is evidence-based. There should be enough evidence that the therapy is in fact useful or beneficial. And that's, pretty logical. There also needs to be evidence that this type of therapy will improve or maintain your skills and independence. Now, we're in that capacity building funding bucket. It has to prove, or there has to be proof that it does that. And then you also do need to show evidence that this therapy is right for you. So typically there would be some kind of report or requirement or statement that indicates why you are receiving or why you're being funded for that therapy. Perhaps it's linked to a particular goal. Now, there are, in the NDIS supports, there are 37 categories of goods and services that the NDIS says they will pay for. And some of those actually relate to therapies. And before today, or before last month, we didn't actually have a list of what those therapies are. And this is the actual list. So the therapy guidelines, we have a super resource on Plan Hero and My Care Space that has the list, but also the most important piece is it indicates who can deliver that therapy. That's super important. So you can't get art therapy from an art teacher. That's not art therapy. Art therapy is delivered by a therapist who is registered with a peak body to deliver this therapy. So this guideline list, there's no way I could include that information in slides. I'm just letting you know that you can have a look at the resource. It's got all of these therapies in it, and it says specifically who can deliver that therapy.
And the biggest piece, Bianca, as well, that I don't want to just go over is that they need to be registered with a peak body. You said that already, but they need to be and have the qualifications and have the insurance and have the backing from the professional group under the Australian Association or peak body that manages that particular modality in order for them to provide the support. So a lot of the changes that we have seen in the therapeutic guidelines with the NDIS is around that, who can deliver it and what qualifications they need in order to be able to say, I'm delivering art therapy as a therapist who is registered through the, got it here, so the
ANZ,
AECATA, and therefore I can provide the supports and charge this particular rate, because there wasn't as much consistency a year ago as to who could provide it. The list of very specific therapies that they now have evidence for, that is evidence-based. So it is a really good list to go off. And also just to point out that just because it's on this list doesn't mean you can get it. It still has to be specific to your disability-related needs. It can't just be for some of these double up with health-related disability-related health needs, and that might not apply to everyone. So just because it's on that list doesn't mean you can access it. But, if it's on that list and it is disability related or it's listed in your plan, you still need to make sure you're getting it by someone who is the qualified practitioner.
And we have a list of therapies the NDIS won't fund, and it's also quite detailed. The one that jumps out there for me is the old animal therapy item. Now, at least we have real clarification around animal therapy, and this is qualified in this list of services the NDIS won't fund. It talks about where animal therapy consists of you having a recreational experience with animals. That is not therapy. Whereas if we have a counselor who uses a horse or a dog as part of the therapy, it might be an equine therapy session delivered by a counselor. They see that as being therapy, not as just a recreational element. And the counselor or the therapist is using an animal as part of the way they're delivering that therapy, just like you might use Lego or sand or something like that. So it's very explicitly defined in these therapy lists that we now have published as of last month. I will sort of put a spanner in the works and say, even though we've got these like two lists where we've got the rules, like what's coming now, Kim, there's always like exceptions, right? And the one that I can think of is chiropractic. Like, I remember for many years, it was you couldn't pay for a chiropractor. But then we would get a participant who has it listed in their plan. So everybody knows we cannot fund chiropractor because NDIS doesn't feel it's evidence-based. Don't shoot the messenger. I have no idea why. But then we will get a plan where someone has it in the notes saying this funding is for a chiropractor. So,
and that's where having planner notes, having a plan, knowing things need to be specifically stated. You can go back to your plan manager and say, I've seen someone had it funded. At the end of the day, we'll say, amazing, but we will need to see your plan. We'll need to see it in your plan where the NDI planner has specifically stated we can use it for those supports. We're not trying to be the bad guy and say we can't do it just because, we'll do it just because someone else has done it. There are still very explicit rules. And that person has probably gone to the effort. Maybe they've gone through an entire tribunal where they've got cases and they've got the evidence from the chiropractor to show how it is disability. We don't know the background always. So you can't just assume. It's very easy to go into those scenarios. That person very well could have been trying for a year and a half, ongoing reviews with the NDS to finally get it approved, and they did. And they had all this hard work where they had the therapist write all the reports and do all the evidence. It's not always that simple, I should say, but it's not always a no. I hate to say that.
Isn't that terrible? And even then, what we often will say to participants is ask for the planner notes, because I know this seems so difficult to understand. I mean, to believe that you might have a plan, which the NDIS sends you, but they don't put all the information that you discussed in the planning meeting in the plan.
Yeah.
Instead, there's another set of information. So we've had people that said, I had this planning meeting and the NDIS said they were going to fund me. We agreed they were going to fund me for this. And we say, it's not in your plan. And then they go, oh, actually, there was an email from the planner with the plan. And in that email, the planner has said, da, 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 and it's not in the plan. So those kinds of things do happen. If you were certain that you were going to be funded for a particular type of support and you don't see it in your plan, that also means your plan manager probably can't pay it. So ask your planner, ask for the planner notes. You can request those at any time. Now, I've been kind of going through a couple of slides because I'm dying to get to this plan again, showing you therapy and then talking about what you've heard a couple of times, stated supports. We've mentioned it a couple of times in the social and community participation. Kim said, it's stated that you have 4 hours a week for one-on-one support. So that's something that it seems to be much more important to us in this NDIS space, is the concept of stated supports. And in therapy particularly, this we are seeing or have seen a lot of. And it's almost like the NDIS goes through kind of phases. 1 week, every plan has a stated therapy support. Next 2 weeks, there's nothing. No stated anything. It's the most bizarre thing. But this is a really great example of therapy in your plan and then actually what stated means. So we've got a couple of plans here. This one is showing you stated supports. Do you want to walk us through this, Kim?
Absolutely. And I should, to that point as well, say sometimes it's also just dependent on the planner and how they've written the plan out. So it can be super frustrating if you have a plan where they've stated things that you don't think you're going to need to access or you hadn't discussed. I would immediately go back to them and say, this is not what we had agreed upon. You're always better off in that response to look through your plan. Are the things that you had discussed in there? Are the therapists or therapies that you discussed been included? If not, and it is something that should have been included or you discussed, go back at that point and say, I'd like to review the funding. So this is a really great example. Since NDIS have released PACE, which is their newest platform or NDIS portal, we're seeing more plans that look like this, where they've stated what therapies someone can actually access. So in the description on the left-hand side, the big box, it says improve daily living skills. That's the capacity building budget that therapy falls under. And then it gives a small general description. So assessment, training or therapy, including an early childhood intervention to help build your skills, independence and community participation. These services can be delivered in groups or individually. Most plans will include that paragraph because that's just a general description of what
blurb
living skills. It's like a blurb, right? That doesn't really mean anything for anyone unless that's all it says and it follows with you can use these funds flexibly. If the next section states specific therapies, you have to use those therapies exactly as they state. So that first paragraph there is kind of redundant. It's just giving you a description of improved daily living. In this case, we've got 2 boxes there that are highlighted: support for a physiotherapist, and it says what the therapist will do, and support for an occupational therapist to assist you with AT and equipment. So you have to, this is stated, use your therapy funding in this situation for physiotherapy and OT. If you had discussed speech therapy and art therapy with your NDIA planner and they said they were going to potentially include this or had that conversation with you after the fact, but this is what your plan looks like, your plan manager will not fund for a speech therapist and an art therapist because your plan says it's for a physiotherapist and an OT. So that's where it says stated, and unless it says flexibly or will be flexible or it doesn't specifically include a therapy model in that description, then you are restricted to what you can access. So
Kim, what happens if this is my new plan and my last plan I had psychology in it? And now my new plan looks like this. It doesn't say psychology.
I would be going back to my NDA planner and I was saying I'd like to review and I'd like to do an internal review, or why was psychology taken out of my funding? I mean, I'd go and ask questions for why they've made that decision, because that is technically the start of how you would request an internal review. So if, psychology is something that you were accessing and you had the reports for psychology after your last plan and you would discuss that with your planner and this is the plan that you've been provided, I would go back and say, well, I don't agree with your decision. We had discussed this, you had mentioned this would be included and it's not. So either you can get planner notes that have further clarification that does include psychology somewhere that it's not listed here, or you would have to go for a review and request that that's included again, because sometimes planners do make mistakes. I'd hate to say they're human, they are, but we do see people that get issued plans where they've just completely forgotten about something or excluded something that should have been included. So I wouldn't just pop this off and say, oh, well, I just won't do it.
But what happens if I've been going to my psychology, every 2 weeks for the last 12 months and I get my new plan, and I go next week and then I submit my psychology invoice to my plan manager, like I've been doing for the last 12 months, what would happen?
They won't be able to pay it.
And it seems ridiculous, right?
Yeah, and that then falls on the plan manager looking like they're the bad person, but the reality is that the plan has clearly stated it. Listen, there are other things where you can go and put a replacement support or a change of circumstance and try and do an immediate rectification, but we see more often than not that these things don't happen too quickly with the NDIS. So, it's very different.
So we're just pointing this out because people don't see it. And it's something that I know the plan managers see. And one of the problems that people have with their plans is they don't realize that because it says the therapy in this section of the plan, that is the therapy they can spend it on. And I know from my care space, we have therapists who deliver services to participants, and then they actually are either have to be paid out of pocket by the participant, or perhaps the participant can't afford it. And they actually don't get paid because they can't be reimbursed for those services. So it's super important.
Yeah,
in the next one,
people who've been engaging with supports for so long and then just have to cut them off all of a sudden, that puts people in a really uncomfortable position. And, often for the therapists as well, then they're kind of sometimes providing supports and left out of pocket because maybe the participant doesn't even read the new plan and they just assume that it's been funded again, and they continue engaging in supports until the first invoice goes out and they've already accessed the supports. So
why wouldn't you?
yes,
You would
exactly.
think. And so here's a different example of where it doesn't say anything.
No. So there's a little bit of confusion here, and I'll tell you why in a second, but it says the exact same paragraph: assessment, training or therapy, including early intervention. I'm trying to squint to read this properly because it's on a very small screen for me. I've split it. And then it says therapy supports to assess and provide strategies to help you build your skills and independence. Your therapists need to provide providers with the support. You can use your therapy budget flexibly for a combination, including a therapy assistant. So just because it said therapy assistant doesn't mean you have to use a therapy assistant, but it's saying you can use your funds flexibly. Now, the only confusing part here,
oh dear, what
I will say, is that at the bottom right-hand section, there's another section where it says this funding component is stated, right? Now, it says there that this funding component is stated, but there is nothing that's stated in the description. So that stated section is sometimes quite also vague, but you can clearly see in this description here, in comparison to the one that we had before, they're not listing any type of therapy. They're saying you're free to use it. It still has to be disability related. It still has to meet the reasonable and necessary guidelines. So you can't just use any therapy on that list just because you want it. You can't go to a podiatrist just because you require, care if it's not disability related. There are plenty of disabilities where podiatry is required, but you can't, just because it's on that list and you need it doesn't mean you can use it if it's not disability related. But this is kind of open to use any of those therapy supports that are accessible. And the other thing to point out here is, because we didn't do it in the previous one, is it gives you the full funding amount, but then it says that this funding component is agency managed. So I think if you go back, the previous one was plan managed, or it was also agency managed.
Agency managed, both of them.
That just means that you're not plan managed. Those funds have to be accessed with an NDIS registered provider. So there's a few examples. I'm not going to go into that now, but that's just where you would find what type of supports you can access based on how the funds are managed.
And it's really, we're showing you these pieces of a plan. This one's for therapy. The last one was for social and community participation. You're going to see it all the way through your plan. The things to look out for is how is it managed? And if it is stated, those are important. And these funding periods, which we'll look at again in a second.
I will actually bring in, because there's a good question based on what you were just talking about there, B, that says, oh no, I've just missed it. Can providers communicate with plan managers to check the funds are available whether therapies are stated or flexible? Really good question, and it kind of ties into that therapy and this section. They can if you've been given approval by the participant. That is the participant's information. It's like you can't call up a bank and ask someone how much money they have left in their bank account. It's still confidential information, even if you are providing that support. So in our instance, if we have a participant and there's a provider saying, firstly, do they have access to funding for these supports, or is there enough funding to cover it? We'll always say, well, we have to get confirmation from the participant that we can even discuss this with you, that it is not a conflict of sharing of data, confidentiality. And if they give a go ahead and they say, yeah, happy for you to share and let them know if there's enough funding to cover their supports, then it is a really helpful tool to budget to make sure that you as a participant have enough funds in those funding periods to cover the therapy supports, and also for that provider to know that they can continue to engage supports and they're not going to be out of pocket. So it really does help everyone. I know it's quite hard because it's really important for me to cover this because we have a lot of people, and historically, where they've been really concerned about sharing their funding information, and I completely understand it. But in order to engage in supports with therapists or any provider, and especially now with funding periods, it's becoming more and more important for you to have that open dialogue with your therapist about how much funding you actually have available and how much funding you have live at that time when you are engaging in supports. Because just what it says on the plan there doesn't always reflect how much is remaining in that budget. So, you don't want to be in the position where you're engaging with an OT and a physio because it says it on your plan, but you've committed to more supports than you should have, and now you're left out of pocket or with no funding left. So it is a really important conversation to have. But as a provider, you can't just call a plan manager and say, I need to know if there's funds there. It's not really your right to do that unless the participant has agreed to share that information.
And if you have a good plan manager, your plan manager will help you look at those amounts and say, yes, you do have that amount. And I know that Plan Hero app and portal has live APIs to the NDIS. So
they do,
what you see there is the actual
breakdowns as well.
Right.
So you see live in time how it would appear in PACE, but you also have budgeting info. So how much would this, if this is the total amount I have left, how much can I break it down into a weekly or monthly spend as well? So it makes life really easy to help you budget and when you're engaging with supports.
I know we've had people at my care space who have said, my plan manager's portal or information says I've got this much funding, and then I go to my portal with the NDIS and there's a completely different number there. That's because they don't have live APIs. They're just kind of trying to reconcile. So you can always ask your plan manager. All right. So funding period looks like a lot, but it's actually not. We've got quite a few slides, and yes, we've gone over time. Again, if you have to go somewhere or you just, want to go to bed, absolutely fine. We're recording it. You can just pick it up tomorrow. This time I'm just going to make it longer so that everybody can.
Maybe we need to make it two webinars.
It's such good info, though. You in this position where you can't leave stuff out. So coming back to funding periods, because it is so relevant to all of us. It's relevant to social. It's relevant to therapy. It's relevant to almost every support that we have in a plan. So we're going to come back to funding periods, look at it in a little more detail, and how it works.
Great.
So I love this picture, because I was trying to think, like, how do I picture funding periods in my mind? And this, like a cake, you've got that whole cake of funding for the duration of your plan, which might be that 1 year plan. And a funding period breaks it up into pieces that you're allowed to eat through that plan. So you have your total fund in installments. And the idea of funding periods is that the NDIS is obviously trying to make people budget, trying to help people keep track of their funds, not come back for more. The days of running out of funds and just going back for more are gone. So now we have to make sure that we know how to budget, so that the NDIS is, in fact, a scheme that continues. Oops. So how often you're able to eat that piece of cake, or how many pieces of cake you've got, depends on the type of support. So some things like home mods or a wheelchair, you would get a big amount of funding upfront. They wouldn't split it over the year. I mean, how on earth would you pay for a wheelchair in quarterly installments? So you'll get that funding upfront. Something like therapy or support workers, they might say, okay, you've got X amount for therapy over the year. Every 3 months, you've got this amount. Things like plan management fees or SIL are broken up monthly. So every month there's an amount which you can spend on plan management, which is just a separate part of your plan, incidentally. Or you have your supported independent living funding, and it gives you a certain amount that can be spent each month. A custom one, and I've seen a lot of these, where over the duration of the plan, we see different amounts. So we might have in the first month a big chunk. I might see that in therapy. First month,
yes,
big chunk. Maybe we're doing a FCA, a functional capacity assessment, or something like that. And then the next months will be lower. So now it's just delivering general therapy. So it's not that you're always going to have a fixed amount. What is important to know is that the funding period start date is the start date of your plan. So your funding period starts at the beginning of your plan and ends at the end of your plan. Now, what happens if you had, $10,000 of therapy for the year, and instead of spending $2,500, a quarter of it in your first quarter, you spend less? You don't manage to spend it all. I know why, because you couldn't find a therapist. So you'd have to go to my care space to find a therapist. But what happens then? Well, then you can actually use those funds in the next installment or in the next quarter. So what you don't spend in one period goes into the next period.
Yep.
But when you get to the end of that plan, Kim, what happens if I never manage to catch up on my therapy funding and I've actually got some left over?
Nothing. It's
gone.
It's null and void. Now, you don't always risk your funds being reduced for the next plan. It just doesn't roll over. It's a brand new plan. It functions as a brand new, entity, or however you want to call it. There's no rollover unless they potentially just extend your plan, and then they might just, extend it for another year as opposed to create a whole new plan. If they've created a new plan, there's no rollover. This is a bit of a controversial topic, though, because there's been a lot of back and forth in the plan management space around what happens if I spend too much. And I am, careful to say that we might also have to update you guys probably in the next week or two with some more correspondence in regards to the feedback on this. There's been some back and forward as to whether you can borrow from future periods or not. The legislation, which is the NDIS Rules and Act, very clearly state you can't, and that is really the hierarchy. That is a nope. It's illegal for you to use funds from your next period if you've exhausted funds in your current period. However, there are some NDIS representatives who are giving feedback to some plan managers saying, well, you might be able to use it when that next funding period is available. Once the next funding period becomes active, you might be able to then pay off any debts that were existing or from exhausted funds. Now, that is still very much against the legislation. I want to be really clear in terms of our stance. The NDIS legislation, which is the hierarchy, says no, you can't. But because there have been some cases where NDIS reps have been given mixed messaging across the plan management, or there's the controversy across all plan management spaces, we're just waiting to get a final word from the NDIS on that. So the biggest thing you need to know is that if you don't use all your funds in your funding period, when the next funding period is active, it will roll over. If you use all those funds in that funding period and it's exhausted, you should stop accessing supports until your next funding period starts. There is no guarantee that you'll be able to back pay for it. And if any case, and even in situations now where people have been doing it, they might still try and recoup that cost later because the rules clearly state, the NDIS legislation and rules clearly state that you shouldn't be. So I just want to put that out there. We don't have final word yet, but we will be updating everyone on that situation.
In this screen, we've already seen it a couple of times, how you can actually see that funding period in your plan. So what about in case? Well, when you log into PACE on the NDIS website or My Place portal, you're able to actually look at the funding period for each type of support that you have. There's just a little screenshot here of where you might find your funding period in the My Place portal. Now, who can see those funding periods? Because that's one of the kind of annoying bits here. You know, we spoke about spending too much in a funding period and how that could be a problem. So, and we're hoping at some point they're going to update this a little, but you can see it. Your support coordinator can see it. Your plan manager might be able to see it, but that's only if you have a plan manager. But your providers can't. So that's why Kim was saying a therapy provider might call us or Plan Hero rather up and say, you know, does this person have funding in this period? Which again, Kim said we can't share. They can't share without consent, but they can't see it.
You can share it as a participant. You have access to
Yes.
share it, and you can tell them, I'm on my PACE now and this is what I see. And I am fully encouraging of participants doing so. We had a question here in regards to providers getting access to the plan or the funding period. I think it's in your best interest as a participant or the carer, and the provider to all be protected. So I think it is really important that you are completely honest and transparent with how much money you have to spend in a period of time, so that they can engage in supports and give you the level of the supports without you ending up having to pay out of pocket, because the NDIS are just getting so much stricter. You're not in the case now where you can just, you know, I'll pay for it with this budget, or I'll take it from here. It's really not that easy. And, you know, we're seeing it does have an impact on people and their budgeting capacity. It's good because it's meant to help people budget, but it also means you actually have to be across it, and you do and should be communicating it with your providers so that they're not going to overservice you and be left out of pocket, or that you're going to have to pay out of pocket.
So with your service agreements now, should you have those amounts in your service agreement?
Yeah, and this is a really good one if there are any providers on here, because I'm having these conversations day in, day out with providers, whether you're a support worker, a therapist. You do not have to issue a new service agreement for every funding period. But what you should do is have the funding periods included in your schedule of supports or breakdown of service costs. So typically a service agreement might be a set like 12 months, or it will be for the actual plan period. So if you have a 12 to 24-month period, you might have a service agreement with your provider for that plan period. And in the breakdown of what supports they're providing, how much they'll be charging you, how often, they might break those down into your actual funding period schedule. So it would be specific to your funding period, which is why when we say sharing your plan is good, because they can see what dates of your funding period schedule is. I think I might have just said that in mishmash as I was saying it out loud. I don't know if that made sense. But Bianca said before, your funding period starts the date your plan starts. It doesn't just start on the first of a month. It's not that simple. So if your plan started today and you had quarterly, monthly periods, your first quarterly funding periods, your first quarterly funding period would be from the 25th of November until the 25th of February, December, Jan, Feb, right? That's 3 months.
Yeah.
Your next quarterly period will start on the 26th of February until the 25th of
March, April, May.
June.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you will only have, in the example that we had before, $735, for example, between today and 3 months' time. And then the next 3 months, you'll only have 735. So it is best for your service agreement to accurately reflect your plan and your funding periods. It's also very good that it reflects how much you have available and you're not overcommitting, and it protects you and it protects the provider.
And just a final thing on this, there's that if it's in your service agreement, it also means that if the service provider delivers more than that, then you're not liable to pay them. Your service agreement stated that this is how much service you were getting in that period. And if they deliver more, then that's against the service agreement. You're not going to be suddenly having to pay it.
Exactly.
So kind of nearing the end, wrapping up, we looked at, okay, so, you know, we've got this therapy and we've got this support, we've got this assistance with social and community participation, loads of people look at how much should I pay. On my care space, the second most popular resource on the platform, and there are about 8,000 people a day, every day, just looking at resources. The support worker rates is the number 2 resource on the platform. So clearly, people are wondering, how much do I pay a support worker, and where can I find easily those support worker rates? Now, the support worker rates are different depending on the time of the day of the week, if it's Saturday, Sunday, public holiday, also the location of the support that's provided. You know, we have this thing called the MMM model that the NDIS uses to create these support worker rates. And if you happen to be in a remote or very remote area, the rate that the NDIS will pay per hour is higher than if you're in a metro area. And also, how you manage your plan is going to affect what kind of support worker you can, in fact, engage. So that it may be different in many areas then.
Yeah, and also those rates will change, as you said. When the NDIS release a new price guide, often the providers will write into their service agreement that these rates will increase with the increase in the next price guide, so that they don't always reissue a new service agreement every time the price guide changes. There might be a clause in a service agreement that says, at this point in time, we've agreed to this amount because this is what the price guide says. But if during this service agreement period there is another reiteration of the price guide, we will increase our rates to match that. And therefore, that will you've agreed to that by signing this service agreement.
And my care space has 2 super cool tools that I'm going to show you. The support worker rates tool, which is just support worker rates. It has every category of support worker rates. It has the prices for each line item for support worker, including assistance with daily life. We've got increased assistance with social and community participation, all the different categories of funding you have for different types of support. You can find under this support worker rates item, which is on the My Care Space website, and it shows you not just the line item, but the price, and then if it's remote or very remote. And you can see just in this little example here, weekday daytime has one rate, weekday evening has another rate, and weekday night. Now your next question is, what's daytime, what's evening, what's night? Well, on this particular resource in the My Care Space website, they are defined. So that information there, what do they call it? Sleepover rates, days of week, it's all laid out really nicely in this resource for you so that you can understand what those hours look like and then the matching rates. Now, the one thing to know is that this is the NDIS price list or support catalog pricing. It doesn't mean that you have to pay this amount. You absolutely don't have to pay this amount. If you were engaging your neighbor to support your child or somebody that you're caring for over, let's say you have to go to work for 3 hours in the morning, and you engage your neighbor as a support worker to help you for those 3 hours that you can't be home. Now, it doesn't mean you got to pay them $70 an hour to do that. They might be quite happy with $40. So just because that is the price doesn't mean that's what you have to pay.
Mm.
Now, the second tool that's on My Care Space is the price list tool. And there's a button at the very top of the website that says search NDIS prices. And you can find it at mycarespace.com.au/price list. And it's also on the Plan Hero website. And you can do a search on any category. Maybe you popped in there occupational therapy, and then it will show you the prices for occupational therapy. Again, support workers as well. In this particular one, I just put in cooking or improve daily living skills, which is what we were talking about earlier. Finding and keeping a job. Maybe you want to see what that pricing is. You can search for any category of funding. You can use keywords or you can use line items. Providers love this tool because they know the line item, but they don't necessarily know the price because the prices change each time the price guide changes. So they can pop in their line item and they can see the price. So what about supports or therapy? Now, first we have to find the support or the therapy. And that's, again, I haven't I've been really serious about the problem that we have with therapy. And because we're talking to participants every day and families, sometimes people haven't found therapy for the first funding period. Their first 3 months, they've still got all those funds because they haven't managed to find a therapist that has capacity in their area. And I mentioned at the start of the webinar that my care space supports NDIS participants. And we did a survey a little while ago, and we asked people what they found the most difficult or stressful. And this was a really great graph that came out of it. So knowing what you could spend your funding on. And we've talked a lot about that. We talked about it in therapy. We talked about it in social and community participation, understanding the plan again. And the second option over here is finding services. So we know that people struggle to find services. And because, as Kim pointed out, everybody has therapy, we know that everybody is looking for it. So on my care space, if you are looking for therapy, you can just pop into the find therapy option or get started, and my care space team can help connect you with therapists that have capacity. It's a really simple process. 1, 2, 3, tell us what you're looking for. We go and do that search and we come back with options. We're also able to actually secure therapy on your behalf, because that's half the problem. You find a therapist that has the capacity, and before you're able to even set up an appointment, it's gone. But the My Care Space allied health team can actually secure that therapy so you don't lose it.
But what if there's a provider here, because we had a question saying that they, how would they find themselves on the platform? So what if they were a provider wanting to provide supports to participant? Where would they go?
Oh, absolutely. Well, there is a provider menu on the My Care Space website, and there's all information links in there. Make an inquiry, find out about how to join My Care Space, ask somebody to send you information. So under the provider menu, you'll find all those provider options.
Great.
Now, this one's for you, Kim. Spending too fast or too slow. So this is the last bit, the spending tips, the last minute or the last item tonight. And I want to know, how do you know if you're spending too fast and too slow? And then what do you do? And how's your plan manager going to help you with that?
Yeah. So a lot of this is stuff that we have discussed in terms of how to avoid it. I think the biggest way of how do you know is keeping track of your budget. So if you have a plan manager, it is their job to send you monthly statements. If it's not in a format that's easy for you to read or understand, then by all means reach out and ask them for something that's more simplified. I'll toot our own horn here, but we have some really amazing reporting that we send off and graphs that people can use, and they can download it in a PDF, and that's all sent monthly, but they also have access to it at any time, and it's live. So keeping up to date and regularly checking in on your funding is really important. I think what a lot of people do is they think, I have a plan manager, they'll figure it out. I can kind of step back and just engage in the supports, which in an ideal world is great. But you do have to have visibility and know what's going on, because if you're spending funds too quickly and your plan manager, if your plan manager is reaching out to you and saying, hey, you need to step back, and you don't do anything about it, more funds are not just going to appear, magically in your plan or on the portal. So you really do have to be aware of what is happening with your budget. So either you've got a plan manager and they're sending you monthly statements, and if they're a good plan manager, they should also be checking in when they notice that your funds are being spent too quickly. Or if you're self or agency managed, jumping onto the PACE portal regularly, having a look at what your budget looks like. I think funding periods help because it breaks things down into smaller amounts. So it helps with kind of visualizing, well, how much do I have to spend in this period? So if you notice that your remaining funds seem quite low and you only have and you have a long period of time until that funding period ends, then you're going to need to think about how you can manage that budget a little bit better. You're going to have to pull back on supports, or you're going to have to engage with your providers and say, listen, I'm not going to have enough that's going to get me through until my end of my funding period. It's getting a lot harder now for providers, because it's not like you can say, we'll just wait until the funding period and we'll use those funds if you've exhausted, because we know that you can't really do that. So you really have to make sure that you are spending within the means and within your funding period.
And if you're plan managed, your plan manager should have a portal or an app or something that will show you how you're tracking against your plan.
Yeah, listen, not every plan manager does, but if you are looking and you do, it's definitely beneficial. It's definitely better because, and I'll say, because, I have ours as a reference, but we also have budgeting tools there where it shows you if you were breaking this down into a monthly or weekly, this is how much you would be spending. So it's helping people build their capacity and understanding around managing money and budgeting, but it also is your responsibility, if it is your funding, to make sure that you're not overusing it. There's only so much a plan manager can do. So as I said, if we notice that someone is overspending and we tell them you're going to run out of funds in 2 weeks and they continue to engage in supports, well, it's not our job to stop the supports. We can't do that. That's not our job. We just notify you, and it is your responsibility to say, okay, no more supports for 2 weeks until my next funding period, or hey guys, we're going to have to really pull back for the next month and reduce, or can we negotiate pricing? And instead of you traveling to us, we come to you so we don't have to pay for provider travel. There's a lot of different things and small things you can do that can make a difference. But I also acknowledge that it's not as easy for everyone. Access is still an issue. So having these conversations up front, having the service agreements in place where you are very clear on what is being delivered, how much it's going to cost you, and over what time period, means that you know what you're getting up front. That service agreement is saying, I have $500 to spend, for example, for the next 3 months. So I am engaging you to engage in supports that will only use $500 for that period of time. If you decide to increase that without my permission or whatever, and I spend over, that's not my responsibility. Or if we spend this, so it's, people are really, I think, don't give enough credit to those conversations and those service agreements. One of the things you touched on as well before is having negotiations with providers around pricing. Just because the NDIS price guide is listed at that amount, that's the peak amount that they can charge you. It doesn't mean that you can't have a conversation with them to say, listen, I would really love to get 10 sessions in for the next 3 months, but I simply can't afford it with my budget. Can we maybe,
come up with a number?
Or what about if we do 45-minute sessions instead of 60-minute sessions? Are you going to charge me for travel? Are you going to charge me for a report? Are you going to charge me for other incidental costs that means I'm going to go over my budget because I can't spend over my budget? So I always think it's really helpful. One of the things that we do at Plan Hero and our team do is we unpack people's plan, or we have those budgeting conversations and we check in every quarter. Take advantage of being able to go through your budget and get prepared for what you can spend for the 3 or 12 or however many months ahead. But I think, you can't not be involved. You cannot just say, I'm going to be notified and that's it. You need to have visibility and you need to be checking in on what your budget's doing at the very least.
So in some way, you need that budgeting tool or that visibility, that knowledge around how your funds are going, because that's really important. And remember that service agreement, again, like I keep hopping back to service agreements because people often think that it's just for the provider, and it's not just for the provider. It controls what that provider can charge you. And it is also a point of reference for your plan manager. So if you have something like supported independent living funding, which can be quite large amounts, you should have a service agreement that specifically states how much that provider can charge you every month. Because if they try and charge you more and you have a service agreement and your plan manager has that service agreement, we cannot pay more than what's in that service agreement. So it's actually protecting you. And there's lots of things that we've said tonight, and Kim particularly mentioned this thing about spending too much and borrowing from funding periods. The information we're giving you tonight is the information that we see on the ground. There might be somebody here that goes, oh, well, it doesn't work like that. And my plan manager pays that and they say they can, or, my support coordinator says something completely different. That's the nature of the NDIS. There is a lot of ambiguities. As plan managers and as my care space, we are simply trying to take the information that we know is true from the NDIS and make it easy to understand. And sometimes there's completely contradictory information, just like we're seeing around funding periods. And that's just going going to happen.
The
That's
nature of
not
the beast that is the
necessary.
NDIS.
Yeah.
I mean, your exact point here is we have one question that I was going to pull on because I didn't touch what if you're spending too slow. Less of an issue in terms of running out of funds. But the question is, I've heard the saying that if you don't spend the funding, you get it next time as the NDS believe it's not needed. It is so case by case. We are seeing people where, yep, that's the case. And in most cases, it's because they don't need it. But in some cases, there is a justification. You know, if they didn't have access to those types of supports, that was a lot easier in COVID. Maybe there weren't, you know, providers that they were able to get supports. Do you have reasons for why you weren't able to use all of your funding? You know, those are conversations that you need to have, but there is no one size fits all response to that. We are seeing some people where their funds are getting cut and some people where their plan is exactly the same the next time around. You know, so, you know, unfortunately, don't really have an answer for that. Yes and no. The question is, if you're not spending, why? You know, and if it is because you genuinely don't need that support, then that's a very different story. If it is that you're having access issues, there's My Care Space and plenty of other resources to find potentially good resources and support.
Services.
But also, if you're finding that, don't wait until the end of your plan to have that conversation with the NDIS. Approach the NDIS beforehand or your planner and say, listen, I'm having trouble. I need these supports. I'm having trouble finding the right person, or I feel like I was provided, you know, only physio and OT, but neither of those supports seem to be meeting my goals or suitable for me. I don't want to get to the end of my plan and not have used it and therefore not getting any funding. Can I use it for speech? You know, have that conversation, because at the very least, you flagged that issue with them 6 months into the plan, not 12 months into the plan when they're going to do a plan review. You can say to them, but I said to you 6 months ago that I'm not using these supports because they're not helping me. And now you're telling me I don't get any funding. Well, maybe if I could have used it for a therapy support like speech or physiotherapy that was beneficial but wasn't stated, it would have been useful. I'm not saying that conversation is going to get you funding for that therapy, but I am saying you're maybe highlighting an issue before it gets to the too late mark. You know, so have those conversations, ask the questions, and listen, where possible, I would always advise going directly to your NDIA planner or LAC, not the NDS web chat. They're great and they're really helpful for general information, but we get mixed messages and you know, responses from the NDS web chat all the time. And it is quite general in nature, or we'll just kind of send you to the operational guidelines or the price guide, which can also be open to interpretation. So if you want a very specific response based on your case that is about your funding, I would always advise calling the NDIS or reaching out directly to your planner or LAC for guidance.
And look, you know, things are difficult. Sometimes there's no logic, there's no reasoning. We know that there's heaps of people, as many people that have really benefit from the NDIS. There are still a number of them that are completely frustrated and having poor experience. And we're just hoping that as the years go on and it gets more organized, that we're going to see less and less of that. But reach out to My Care Space to find supports and services. Look at the website to find information. If you need a plan manager that is going to support you, talk to Plan Hero, look at their resources as well. This has been the longest 1 hour webinar that we've ever delivered.
I hope we don't continue to break records, because I feel like you and I,
this is terrible.
It's been a while. So, this is why I'm not allowed to be on webinars, guys.
I know.
It's just for a while.
We just can't help ourselves sharing. So we will send the recording by the end of tomorrow. Please do not email us at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning asking for the recording. At the end of the day, we'll email it off to everybody, but also with a list of resources, all the things we spoke about tonight, identifying, you know, rates for support worker therapy, looking at that social and community participation, looking at different parts of your plan. There'd be some super resources to help you that will be easy to understand. And also what we'll do is we'll look at those questions and see the ones that we've missed, if we can pop some answers in there to help people. So
and a big shout out to Jackie. Thank you so much. There were lots of Q&As that she got to. I think I answered a few in between, but she answered a heap of those there. So a big thanks to Jack for holding down the fort and trying to balance between us asking her questions and you guys getting in there. So hopefully you guys got those questions answered. By all means, reach out to Plan Hero, the hello@planhero.com.au or hello@mycarespace.com.au if you have any questions. We are always happy to help, and we are always happy to take on more clients if you guys are looking for an amazing plan manager. If you're just not happy with your plan manager and you want some more support, I can't back my team enough. They're all incredibly passionate and knowledgeable. So hopefully between Bianca and I today, you guys are leaving with a little bit more confidence, NDIS confidence.
There you go. Surely. I hope so. I mean, I feel more confident.
Sick of our voices. I don't know, either or.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for taking the time. I hope everyone sleeps very well.
Yes. I hope your little bub doesn't wake up now and be ready to rock and roll.
Oh, don't. I'm going straight into
what
bed.
That's like.
Straight to bed.
So thanks, everybody. And
Thanks, guys.
So many people are still with us, which is amazing. And I'm hoping that tells us that, people want more information. Information is key. And if we can just share practical information, then hopefully everyone is going to be more confident in this NDIS journey, challenge, experience.
And feedback. We're always open to feedback. So if you guys want to.
I knew there was something. There's a survey, Kim, that when you all say goodbye, it pops up on the screen. There's only like 3 questions. Please answer and give us some feedback. It's really helpful. Thanks, so everybody guys. Have a great night.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.